the Torah, when the Torah speaks about the mitzvah of Shemitah, the mitzvah of every seventh year in the land of Israel, the land is not worked. The land is rest, so to speak. And just like every week a Jew has, wherever we are in the world, the day of Shabbos, so too there is. So just like in time, there is Shabbos. And what Shabbos is all about, Sheishes Yamim Tavod, for 6 days of the week. We have to be involved in this world. We cannot rely on miracles. God set up the world that everything comes from the one creator, just like the manna that fell down in the wilderness for 40 years for the Jewish people. But we're not privy to the manna all the time. And when the Jewish people came to the land of Israel, and nowadays, thousands of years later, we have to work to get our means, to get our sustenance. But we have to remember that's what Shabbos is. Shabbos is 1 day a week. We don't have to do any hishtadlus. We don't try to make a living. 1 day of the week, God says, relax. Don't worry about it. 1 day of the week, you're exempt. I'm going to take care of you. I'm really taking care of you every day. Sunday, Monday, Tuesday, Wednesday. I'm taking care of you every single day. God, Hashem is taking care of us every single day. But those days, Hashem takes care of us, but we have to try. Otherwise, we can't rely on miracles. Not like the wilderness. That was a one-time thing, the manna falling from heaven for 40 years. But Shabbos reminds us that Hashem is running things, even during the week. We're just going through the motions. And Shabbos, Hashem says, I don't want you to do any hishtadlus. I don't want you to just relax. But Shabbos, B'menucha, comes Shabbos, comes its day of rest. And that's it. So too, we have the land, the Shemitah, the Shabbos, the Shavsar, Shabbos La Hashem. Very fascinating. A trivia question. You'd say, where does the Torah speak about Shabbos? So, of course, everyone's going to say the day of Shabbos, the seventh day of the week. Right? And maybe a person might also say Yom Kippur. Yom Kippur is called Shabbos Shabbosin. It's the Shabboses of the whole year, the ultimate Shabbos, right? So to speak. There's a third one, the Shemitah, the land laying fallow. We don't work the land in Israel. That's also called Shabbos. It's also called the Shabbos, the day of rest for Hashem. So Rashi says over here, what is this mitzvah, the mitzvah of Shemitah, what does it have to do with Mount Sinai? It's a very famous Rashi. Ma'in Shemitah Eitzel Har Sinai. What is the matter of Shemitah doing next to Mount Sinai? Why does the Torah say on Mount Sinai, by the mitzvah of Shemitah, by this specifically in the context of the laws of Shemitah, as opposed to other laws? And in English, a lot of times we say, what does that have to do with the price of tea in China? The whole Torah was giving on Mount Sinai. Well, now every single portion we could start off by saying Mount Sinai. Says Rashi, that's the point. Says Rashi, V'alo kol hamitzvos nemru miSinai. Were not all the commandments stated at Sinai? The Jewish people received all the commandments on Har Sinai. Ella, rather, it's coming to teach you. Ma Shemitah. Just as with Shemitah, Nemru Klaloseha, Pratoseha, Diktukea miSinai. The general rules, its details, and its fine points were stated at Sinai. Moses received the entire Torah, all down to the minutiae, to the fine details of the Jewish law. Af Kulan, so too with all the commandments, Nemru Klalosehen, V'diktukehen miSinai. Their general rules, their fine points were stated at Sinai. When we open up a code of Jewish law, Shulchan Aruch, we see the oral law, Rabbi Yosef Kairo, Moshe Israelis. We see the Magen Avram, the commentaries on the side, the Shach, the Taz. You think, oh, they're saying something. No, they are bringing from the Talmud, and the Talmud is from Moses on Mount Sinai. It's the tradition from, it had to be redacted and written down so we don't forget it, because they were starting to forget it before. Rabbi Yehuda Hanasi in the times of the Mishnah, they did not write anything down. It was completely oral. But, says Rashi, all the minutiae, all the details of the laws of Taryag mitzvahs, of the 613, they're all from Mount Sinai. They're all from Moses. Kach Shinuya B'Toras Kahanim. This is what's on Toras Kahanim. And then Rashi says something very fascinating, a historic context, the Nirali, and it appears to me, Shekach Perusha. This is its explanation. Why the Torah says specifically by Shemitah, the sabbatical, where the land rests, where we don't work the land, specifically it's prefaced with Mount Sinai, that the Torah is given on Mount Sinai. Since we do not find Shemitah's Karkayos, the passage of Shemitah of land, which which was repeated in the plains of Moab, Mishnah Torah, says Rashi, if you look in the entire book of Devarim, and the entire book of Deuteronomy, there are a lot of mitzvos that are repeated in the book of Devarim, in the book of Deuteronomy, in the fifth book of the Torah. That is why it's called Mishnah Torah. Mishnah Torah means a review of the Torah, going over the Torah. However, says Rashi, another trivia question, the laws of Shemitah are not repeated. It's said over here, and in our portion in Leviticus, in the Vayikra and Leviticus, is where the laws are. It's not repeated in Sefer Devarim, in the book of Deuteronomy. Right before, when they were in the plains of Moab, right before they went to the land of Israel. Lamadna, we have learned that its general rules, its details, will say that Sinai, and Scripture comes to teach us here about every statement that was communicated to Moses. They were all from Sinai, the Chazar, and they were repeated and reiterated at the plains of Moab. But just like this, Mount Sinai, the laws of Shemitah, which are not specific to, which are not repeated rather in the book of Devarim, the book of Deuteronomy. So too everything else, and even that which is, repeated in the book of Devarim. Let's see number 7 over here. The law of release of fields on the 7th year was not repeated in the book of Deuteronomy. We would assume, without being told so, that its laws must have all been given at Mount Sinai. The Torah, nonetheless, meaning it's redundant here. Of course, it's said at Mount Sinai because it wasn't repeated in the plains of Moab before they went into the land of Israel. Nonetheless, the Torah states the apparently superfluous on Mount Sinai to indicate to us that this law is to be viewed as a binyan av, a paradigm for which to draw a general rule for all commandments. Just as the law of release of fields on the 7th year was given on Sinai in full detail, so too all other commandments, even though it was repeated in the book of Deuteronomy, were given at Sinai. So that's exactly what it is. Okay, Shabbos LaHashem. So it says Rashi, the land rests, l'shem Hashem, for the sake of Hashem. Meaning a person's not, we'll give the land a break. I need a break, right? No, we're doing it. And Shabbos day too, we don't do work. We're not creative because it's a mitzvah God commanded us, and it's for the sake. It's Shabbos for Hashem, for the sake of Hashem. That's what Rashi really brought. It doesn't mean a day of rest for God. God does not need to rest. God is not physical. Is not affected by physical phenomena. So Rashi's explaining, what does it mean, a day of rest for God? It means we're resting for the sake, l'shem Hashem. L'shem Shnei Shabbos Bereshis, just as is regarding the Sabbath of creation, the weekday Shabbos. It's also Shabbos LaHashem. And again, it doesn't mean that God needs to rest. God does not need, he's not physical in any way, shape, or form. He doesn't need rest. But it is, we do it l'shem, for the sake of, because God told us to do it. Says the Torah, for 6 years, for 6 years you may sow your field, and 6 years you may prune your vineyard, and you may gather in its crop. But, says verse number 4, but on the 7th year, Shabbos Shabboson yeh la'aretz, it shall be a complete rest for the land. Shabbos LaHashem, a Shabbos for Hashem. Sod chaloi sizra, your field you shall not sow. Karma chaloi sizmor, your vineyard you shall not prune. The aftergrowth of your harvest you shall not reap, and the grapes of your keeping away you shall not pick. It shall be a year of rest for the land. The resting of the land shall be yours to eat, for you, for your slave, and for your maidservant, and for your hired worker, and for one who resides with you. For your animal and your beast that is in your land shall all its crops be to eat. So there's a lot to unpack over here. Let's see some of the Rashis. He says, Rashi, right, there shall be to the land for the fields and the vineyards. Right, so they're not going to prune the aftergrowth of your harvest. Says Rashi, even if you did not sow it, v'hit samcha, and it sprouted min hazer shenafel b'beis hakatzir, from the seed that fell into the ground at the time of the previous year's harvest. It's called safiach, the aftergrowth. Still, and the idea is we don't show any bias, we don't show any ownership over the land. Right? It's your field. It's your ancestral field. No question. The deed is yours. And right? We know that the land of Israel was divvied up according to the size of each tribe. Which tribe should be where? That's in the book of Joshua. That was done by a gorel. That was done by a lottery. Which tribe should be where? But the land was divvied up and it was their heritage, which remained with them forever. But on the Shemitah year, we act as if we don't own the field and we're not involved in it. Like 6, you shall not reap, lios maxikla, to take possession of it, like other harvests. Rather, Rashi says, very fascinating, Ella hefker yeh lakol. Your field, and again, you have the field belongs to you indeed, no question about it, belongs to you. But you do not show any dominion over it, that it's yours. Anyone could go inside the field. It's as if it's ownerless, lakol, for anyone to take freely. Right? During the other years, a person is not allowed to go into your field and take the fruits. That's called stealing. Not allowed to take without permission. On the Shemitah year, he could go in. It's hefker. It's like ownerless. Let's continue here. Sifsar says Rashi, you shall not pick those which you keep from others. Ein chabotzer, you may not pick. Ela min mufkar, but you may pick from those ownerships that has been relinquished. Meaning, if it's already, you're allowed to take for yourself. A person is allowed to eat from the field during Shemitah, but he's not allowed to gather it in. He's not allowed to forbid others from coming in. But if it's what's ownerless, then you could partake of it. It's not what's called asur behana. It's not forbidden to get benefit from the field during the Shemitah year. That's not what it's talking about. But it means you're not allowed to work the field and you're not allowed to show ownership over the field. It's a Shabbos It's a resting of the land.
Are you supposed to plow the land under at the end of the 6th year to let the land lay fallow and rest? Or do you just leave it alone and whatever grows?
You're supposed to leave it alone and whatever grows. Are you with me? I think I lost my screen.
Yeah, you just did.
Okay. Yeah. Let's see here. Hopefully it's not going to happen again.
There it is.
Yeah. Back. So usually it's the latter of what you said. You just let whatever grows. Let's see though. Let's see what Rashi says. These are the verses that speak about many of the commandments. So the next Rashi is what we just said outside. Even though I forbade the fruits of the 7th year to you, I did not forbid them for eating nor for other benefit. Only that you should not treat them as an owner does. Ella, rather, it should be all equal. It should all be equal. Everyone has equal rights. You, your hard worker, and the one who resides with you. So that's what it is. That's you could benefit from it. You could bring in food, from what you need for that day, but you can't start gathering it all. You have to leave it out, and anyone can take. Shabbos haaretz lachem la'achla min hashvus ata ochel, from that which has been rested. You may eat v'ata ochel, but you may not eat min hashamar, from that which has been kept. Let's see number 20. This is the Medrash Torah's Kahana, from that which has been kept. Rashi means that which has been grown from the start with intent to be kept. Produce that grew as a result of forbidden agricultural work performed in the 7th year. If a person started working his field, he's not allowed to, and he did it. Unlike produce that grew by itself from that which ownership was not relinquished. Produce that as a result of forbidden work may not be eaten, even if it is subsequently made available to take freely by the public. Person has to be careful. Don't work the field. You can't partake of it if you do. It has to be right. You, your slave, and your maidservant. Because it says, with the destitute of your people shall eat. That's going to, right? One might be able to think that the fruits of the 7th year should be forbidden to the rich with regard to eating. Maybe it's only your slave, maidservant, the poor people, right? We had in last week's Torah portion, right? Smack in the middle of the holidays, it was the mitzvah. And we spoke about that last week, about the mitzvah of lekat shichad peah, the gleanings in the field, or leaving a portion of your field for the poor. That if it's a person's rich, then he can't partake in that. Says Rashi, however, with Shemitah, it's different. With Shemitah, Talmud Lomar teaches otherwise. The verse says, for you, your slave and your maidservant. Hare Bailam, see now that owners, Va'avadim, and slaves, Ushfachos, and slave women, Amurim Khan are stated here, meaning it's allowed for anyone to partake in it. Okay? And says Rashi, was skircha latoshavcha, for hired workers and for one who resides with af hanachim, even the non-Jews, it's not, one might think maybe that the land has an intrinsic holiness, sanctity of, there is sanctity of the seventh year, but nevertheless, anyone could eat from it. For your animal and your beast. So Rashi says like this, Im lechaya, if a beast, undomesticated, ownerless animal, ochelas, may eat from it, go in your field, you can't stop it. Behema lo koshkein, is it not true? All the most or a domesticated animal, shemazono seha alecha, for which food is upon you, feeding is your responsibility. So why does the verse say also for your domesticated animal? It says Rashi, makish behema lechaya. It compares a domesticated animal to a wild animal as follows. All the while that the wild beast from the field is able to freely eat, go into your field and eat from it, then you could feed your animal minabayis from the house. You may store, so Rashi says, you may store a supply of the type of produce for your domestic animals for them to eat. So you can bring it into your house, right? Even though it's sabbatical year. But says Rashi, if it has been finished for the wild beast from the field, if it is no longer found in the field, so then you have to get rid of your animal. You have to get rid of it for your animal in the field. You have to take out what you have stored. I'm sorry, you have to get rid of it for your animal of the house, the domesticated animal. You have to take what you have stored for your animal and make it available to all. And again, what's the idea? The idea is you can't show ownership over it. It's Hashem's land every seventh year. Right, you have to remember in the ancient times, it was a very agricultural type of existence. We were all farmers, except for the Levites, the Kohanim. They didn't have a portion of the land, and they got what was their tithes and the 24 gifts of the Kohen that he got in lieu of having ownership in the land. He was very connected to God. He was a servant of God in the Levium, in the temple. And they were not supposed to live mundane lives. They would live very elevated lives in the temple, and they were not working the field. But by and large, everyone was working the field. So the Shemitah was not realizing that Ki li haaretz. The Torah is going to say very soon, the land is mine, God says. Don't forget the land is mine. It's also akin to a similar idea that we should not be stingy with our possessions. Rashi says, by the laws of, in Parshas Mitzorah, where the laws of tzaras, leprosy. So Rashi says that there's leprosy on the body, and there's tzaras of the spiritual disease, not really leprosy, it's spiritual disease, malady of the skin, of the house. So Rashi says, why did it come of the house? So one of the reasons it came of the house is because a person was stingy, tzaras ayin. They were stingy. They didn't like lending. They didn't like lending out their things. I don't want it to get ruined. I don't want it to get dirty. Obviously, if someone ruins it, they're responsible for it. But it's this idea that you think it's yours. You think you can have it forever. You think, oh, this is mine forever. I'm going to have it. So Shemitah is, no, you can't show any ownership over it. So here as well, if the animals of the field cannot partake in it, so then you have to empty it from your house, all the while that it is available for the animals in the field. So then you can bring it into your house. Fascinating. You can. Rashi says you can bring it into your house, and you could have a storage for your animals, even though it's a Shemitah year. But if it finishes, so then it is it has to be taken out. And that's the idea. Realizing that it's God's land and we're not here forever. It's a story with a rabbi lived in Brooklyn, and he had a neighbor, a secular person, and he was very involved in his property. And he said over a story that he actually had monogrammed all of his fences with this big his initials monogrammed, a crest of sorts, to show his property. And then a few years later, he went the way of all flesh. He passed away, and new people bought the house. And he says for years, it stood there, his monogram. He didn't live it. He wasn't alive anymore. His new owners, but they didn't want to take it off. I guess it looked nice or whatever it is. So the idea is not doesn't mean that we can't be involved in taking care of our property or having nice things, but we have to realize it's for a higher purpose, and we have to realize not to get too involved in it, and that we make it our mainstay. To realize that it is we're passing here.
Just
The
want to
world
say,
is a
just
yes.
I just want to say welcome to Noah.
Thank you.
Yeah. Welcome. Yes. Thank you. So that's the idea. The idea of the Shemitah is that we recognize that Olam Hazeh, like it says in Ethics of Our Fathers, Olam Hazeh pros dor, Olam Haba. This world is a vestibule. It's the vestibule to the big banquet. Can you imagine a huge mansion or huge palace, a huge, tremendous, the biggest palace in the world? So when you're coming in to go into the banquet, so maybe you check your tie, you check your make sure you're ready to go as you're walking in the corridor. This world, as our sages say, this world is what we see in this world is just merely a corridor for the soul. And when we leave this world, that's when we enter. How big is a corridor? How big is a vestibule in a palace? It's not that big at all. It's not the main. You certainly didn't go there for that. So that our soul is in this world and in this just the vestibule. And that's what the mitzvah of Shemitah reminds a Jew. He works very hard, reminds the Jewish people. He works very hard for 6 years. He's tilling the land. He has to, all different seasons, the seasons of planting, the seasons of pruning, and then the seasons of harvesting and gathering it in. It took his time, right? That's all great. But he has to recognize that this is he's passing. He's just passing by. So that's the Shemitah laws. That's what the Shemitah laws is about. One of the main concepts. We'll talk about another concept as well. Let's continue. You shall count for yourself. So this is not the counting in last week's Torah portion. The counting of Sfiras HaOmer, which is what we're in the middle of. We have to prepare ourselves for the giving of the Torah on Shavuos. So we count the second day of Passover. Every single day, we do another counting. So that's in last week's Torah portion. This is not, and that's for every individual. Every individual, we prepare our personal spiritual journey to prepare ourselves for the holiday of the giving of the Torah. Kabbalah HaTorah. This counting, though, that the Torah speaks about here is for Beis Din, for the Jewish court. And it goes like this. Verse number 8. You shall count for yourselves Sheva Shabbosos, 7 Sabbaths of years. So 7 every 7th year Shemitah, and then another 7 years, and then Shemitah, another 21 years Shemitah, right? It goes till 49 years. Shemitah, 7 times, 49 years. You have 7 Shemitahs, cycles. And the days of the 7 Sabbaths of the year shall be for you 49 years. And then, right after, at the end of that year, leading to the 50th year, V'havarta shofer trua b'chodesh hashvi. You shall sound a blast, a broken blast of the shofar in the 7th month, on the 10th of the month, on Yom Kippur. Tavir shofar b'chol artzachem. You shall sound a shofar throughout your land. V'kidashtem eshnas chamishim shana. You shall sanctify the 50th year. So we're sanctifying the 50th year. That Yom Kippur, besides it being Yom Kippur like every year, it's a Yom Kippur of Yovel. There's a special shofar blast. We don't really have this. We blast a shofar at the end of Yom Kippur to signify that the different reasons given, the blasting of the shofar that we do at the end of the holiday of Yom Kippur, signifying that the holiday is over, that it's permissible to eat. And it's permissible, the forbidden labor and whatnot is it's over by the blasting of the shofar. And there's deeper reasons also blowing the shofar. It's the Shekhinah, the presence of God, is leaving from the tremendous day of Yom Kippur, the holy and awesome day of Yom Kippur. So we blow the shofar. But this is talking about this is talking about the mitzvah of, and by the way, FYI, this is famously on the Liberty Bell. These verses right now. I think it's from maybe verse 12. I don't remember exactly, but this definitely from verse 12. is on the Liberty Bell in Philadelphia. These verses. And let's continue here. 50 you shall be free. I lost it here. It is right. Yovel he. It's Yovel, the 50th year shall be. You shall not sow. You shall not harvest. It's aftergrowth. You shall not pick from what you set aside for yourself. Ki Yovel he, for it is a Yovel. It shall be holy to you. From the field you may eat its crops. I'm sorry, I'm going the wrong way. Here we go. Oh, here. So this is the verse. So let's go back a little bit. Okay, yeah. So we're counting 7 Shabbos, 7 years, and the days of the 7 Shabbos of the years shall be for you 49 years. And then you shall sound a broken blast on the shofar in the 7th month, on the 10th of the month, on the Yom Kippur, you shall sound the shofar throughout your land. You shall sanctify the 50th year, and you shall proclaim freedom throughout Prasim Gerar Baretz. You shall proclaim freedom throughout the land. L'chol Yoshveh, for all its inhabitants. Yovel he, it is the Yovel year. Tia lachem shall be for you. V'shavtem ish al chuzaso v'ish al mishpachto tashuvu. Each man and his to his ancestral heritage, you shall return each man to his family. Let's continue a little more, then we'll see the Rashi's a lot to see over here. Yovel he, it is a Yovel, the Jubilee, the 50th year. Tilachem shall be for you. Los is Ra'u, shall not sow, shall not harvest. It's aftergrowth, you shall not pick for what was set aside for yourself. For it is a Yovel, it shall be holy to you. From the field you may eat its crop. In this Yovel year you shall return each man to his ancestral heritage. Okay. And that's the end of the first Aliyah. Next, the Shemitah and the Yovel. Let's see the Rashi's here. So Shemitah we have, and so now we have 49 years. And now we come to the Yovel year. Shabbos Shanim, right? So let's go back over here. Count for yourself 7 Sabbaths of years. Sheva Shabbos Shanim. So says Rashi, Shemitah Shanim, release of years, periods of release, a year in duration. Yachli Yasa Sheva Shanim, with Super Shemitah, one might be able to think that he should keep 7 consecutive years of Shemitah at the end of the 49-year cycle, meaning a person might misread the verse. And at the end, he keeps 7, right? Because, right, it says, you shall count for yourself 7 Sabbaths of years. 7 years, 7 times you shall, and right, in the days of the 7 Sabbaths of the year shall you be 49 years. Says Rashi, a person might think that he's going to have 7 Shemitahs afterwards. And then Yasa Yovel, and he should keep the Yovel year. Acharem after them. Tamal Omer, verse teaches otherwise. Sheva Shadim Sheva Pa'amim. 7 years, 7 times. Heve Omer. You should say, Kol Shemitah Shemitah Vizmana. Each Shemitah in its time. So we have each Shemitah in its time. 7 right years in the cycle of 49 years. Sheva. The days of the 7th Sabbath shall be for you. Magid Lecha. This tells you Sha'afal Bishalo Asisa Shmitos. That even if you did not keep the Shemitah years, Aseh Yovel, keep the Jubilee year. Let's say the Jewish people were exiled in the middle, and then they went back to the land, right? That's what Rashi's talking about, right? They, for whatever reason, they didn't keep the Shemitah year. At the end of 49 years, you still keep the Yovel year. The simple reading of the verse is the total years of the Shemitahs shall add up to the number 49. And then we sound the shofar. Ve'avarta. Ve'avarta means, it really means pass through. Avar means passing through in Hebrew. So Rashi says, what does that mean? Passing through the shofar. It means vayavru kol b'machane. Means they proclaimed in the camp. Lashon hachraza. It means announcing. They announced, the blow of the shofar announced Yovel. B'yom Kippurim. Right, so Rashi says, by implication, it is being said on Yom Kippur, Ein yodeh shu be'esol chodesh. Do I not know it is the 10th of the month? And came Lama never be'esol chodesh. Why does it say the 10th of the month? As long as it says Yom Kippur, we know Yom Kippur is on the 10th of the month from other places in the Torah. So why does it have to say the 10th of the month Yom Kippur? Both. Ella, says Rashi, Lo Merlecha, it says to you, Takias Asor Lachodesh, the blowing the shofar on the 10th of the month, Docha Shabbos, it overrides the Sabbath, Bechol Artzechem, throughout your land. Vein Takias Rosh Hashanah, Docha Shabbos, but the blowing of the shofar Rosh Hashanah does not override Shabbos, Bechol Artzechem, throughout your land. Ella, the beast in Bavad, only in the court. Right, let's see 33. Blowing the shofar does not fall under any categories of work forbidden on Shabbos and festivals. After the destruction of the Beis Hamikdash, Rabbi Yochanan ben Zakkai, the head of the highest court, the great Sanhedrin, decreed that the shofar may not be blown on Shabbos other than in places where courts are located, lest people carry the shofar 4 amos in the public domain. This prohibition is of rabbinic origin. The prohibition suggested by our verse is an asmachta. It's an allusion by the Torah to a law of rabbinic origin. Very fascinating. It's an asmachta. The Torah over here, the verse is alluding to a rabbinic or a mitzvah of rabbinic origin. B'kidashtem, you shall sanctify. B'knisas, on its onset. Makdishin osa b'bezdin, they sanctify it in the court, and they say Mikudesh Hashanah. This year, the year is sanctified. Says Rashi, the Jubilee year, the 50th year, Krasam Duro, you shall proclaim freedom, lavadim, for Hebrew servants. Bein nirtza, whether he is one who had his ear bored. Bein shelo kalu lo sheshan, or whether his 6 years have not expired. Kishenikar, from the time he was sold. Meaning that Jewish slaves, we know that if a person stole, he didn't have the wherewithal to pay back, then he's sold as a Jewish slave. And that typically, that's in Parshas Mishpatim, in Exodus, in Sefer Shemos. And that typically is 6 years. And then he's in the 7th year, he's freed. And all which time he's paying back the owner, and the owner has to take care of him and his family. And this is a social safety net that if a person stole and he can't pay it back, you don't just lock him up and then his family suffers, but the family's provided by the owner, and he's an employee. He's an employee of the Baal Habayis, of the owner that he stole from, wherever he stole from. Jewish slave. But we know that if after 6 years he says, Ahavti Adoni, I love my master, I don't want to leave. So we know there's a process of they made a little hole by his earlobe, almost like an earring hole. And we spoke about it then, I believe, the significance to that. So Rashi, though, is saying over here that a Jewish servant, a Jewish Eved, who was sold, automatically leaves during the Jubilee year. Jubilee year, he leaves, even if he did the nirtza, he was supposed to be forever, so to speak, but no Jew it's not forever, it's until the Jubilee year, or whether he was sold last year, beginning of his term. Nevertheless, everyone is freed by the Jubilee year. Let's continue. Amar Rabbi Yehuda. Rabbi Yehuda says, Ma'u lashon duror. What does it mean by duror? How does it imply freedom? To proclaim freedom. So it's the Hebrew word is duror. So what does that mean, duror? Where does it come from? Says Rashi, Kimidayer be Dario Makulu, as one who lives in a dwelling place, etc., which means, so it's a language of dar. Dar in Hebrew means to dwell. So how does dwelling mean freedom? So it says Rashi, Shadar b'kol makom shu rotze. A free person lives wherever he pleases. The Einor b'rshus acherim. He's not under the authority of others. So the Torah is saying all the Jewish servants, avadim, that are mishubad, they're involved with they were sold, so they're involved with they're an employee for their boss, and they can't leave. Once the Jubilee year comes, then they could dwell wherever they want. In other words, they could leave. They could go. If they're free to leave, that means they're free. If they're not free to leave, then they're not free. So that's the Hebrew word. Fascinating. Ukurasem duror, Rashi says, you shall proclaim freedom. It comes from the language of dar, to dwell. And it's because you could dwell wherever you want. Very fascinating. Yovel it is the Yovel. Shana zos mevudelos mishar shana means the year distinct from other years. Benikva shem la levada, through the living I'm sorry, through the giving of a name to it alone. Umash Shema, and what is its name? Yovel Shema. Yovel, the Jubilee. Al Shem Tekiah Shofar, on the account of the blowing of the shofar. Let's see 38. The word Jubilee or Yovel means ram's horn. It is related to the Arabic word for ram, Yovla. In this, Rashi disagrees with both Ibn Ezra, who understands Yovel to mean sent out, and Nachmanides Ramban, who understands the term to mean freedom of movement. According to them, the word refers to setting free of the servants. So Rashi, according to Ibn Ezra and the Ramban, the word Jubilee stems from freeing the servants. According to Rashi, it stems from the horn, the shofar that's blown. And that's where the word Jubilee comes from. Okay. And not only the servants, says Rashi, so the verse says, you shall return each man to his ancestral heritage. Shasados, for the fields which have been sold, Chozers Levalean, return to their owners. Right? The land of Israel is ancestral and cannot be sold forever. And that's why the next verse is coming up. I don't know if we're going to have time to start it, but speak about.
I have
yes.
A quick question about the Jubilee year. So, if an individual wants to leave on the Jubilee year, he can leave and take his family with him. If he doesn't want to leave, can't he stay as an employee, so to speak, or must he stay as a slave in order to have his family taken care of? You follow the difference? If you're an employee, you're responsible for your family. If you're a slave, then the owner is responsible for the family. Is that the way it works?
Well, the Jubilee year, he no longer could keep him as an eved, as a servant. You have to realize that there are two types of servants. There are two types of, we have it later on in the portion over here as well, but there are two types of, in the end of this week's portion speaks about the Canaanite eved, the Canaanite servant. The Canaanite servant was someone who was from the nations of the world that was the person's servant or slave, and they go through a quasi-gerus, conversion. I shouldn't say quasi. They go through a conversion, but they're obligated only in certain mitzvahs. They're not obligated in any time-bound mitzvahs. They're obligated only in the non-time-bound mitzvahs. And those servants, that's in the end of this week's portion, they are passed down from generation to generation, and they're only freed. The Canaanite servant should only be freed for a mitzvah if they're needed, if there's some sort of good reason to set him free. The Talmud talks about, but otherwise they're not. They're inherited. Here we're talking about the Jewish slave, the Hebrew servant. He's a Jew, just like anyone else, and he's only sold if he is so destitute that he can't afford to pay for his family members. He can't afford anything, or he's so destitute and he did something prohibited. He stole, so then he is sold, and he's only sold for 6 years. The 7th year is free. And that is right. Now, here we're talking about the Jubilee year, when the Jubilee year comes. So now, let's say the servant sold for 6 years. So we know in Parshas Mishpatim that if after 6 years he says, I love my servant, I love, like you said, I love, he takes care of me, he's very good to me, right? And the laws are the Talmud says, Masha kana eved kana rabo. When you acquire a Jewish slave, you acquire a master over yourself, because you really have to treat him really well. So that servant, no matter what, leaves during the Jubilee year. You understand what I'm saying? He cannot say, I have to stay. Now, he could be a socher, he could be a worker, right? In the times of the Talmud, in the ancient times, they actually had a oris, it was called an oris. An oris was a sharecropper, right, where he said, listen, you have this field, I'm going to take care of it for you. I'm going to be the custodian of the field. Now it is your field. So we'll make a deal. I'm going to take whatever the percentage, I'll take 30%, you'll get 70, it's your field, but I'm going to get 30, or I'll get 40, 60. So a sharecropper is like a regular worker. Here we're talking about someone who was so destitute, he was sold by the Jewish court as a servant. And there he is forced to go out in the Jubilee year.
Okay. Got it.
And when he's sold as well, they had an idea when the Jubilee year is, because his price, the flux, would be contingent on when the Jubilee year is. And the next Aliyah coming up, the Torah says, don't rip off your fellow when he's buying a field from you, because you can't really buy a field in the land of Israel because it's ancestral and it remains in that tribe, it remains in that family. What you could do is you could lease. So someone from a different tribe could come and lease a field or within the own tribe, but it's not his ancestral property. So he could lease the property, but that goes out in the Jubilee year. So the Torah says, don't rip. Let's say it's let's say we're in the cycle. They would have a calendar in those days, or they would know. Let's say, calendar is not necessarily, but they would know, and they would look and say, oh, the Jubilee year is in 3 years. So obviously, if you're leasing a property, and of course you could set in a specific amount of time, but you can't override what the Torah says. So when the Jubilee year comes, you can't sell someone a property for a lease. A lease, again, you're not selling it forever. You're not allowed to, but it was a lease. So you can't lease it. You sell them a lease of your property for 6 years, but you know that the Jubilee's in 3 years. You're ripping the guy off 3 years, right? So the Torah says, don't rip off him. You have to give a fair amount. So that was the lease of properties. But as far as the Hebrew servants could not remain by the Jubilee year. They had to go out. All right, let's hold it over here by this Aliyah. Is a lot more in the portion. God willing, we'll continue on Shabbat. Shabbos for anyone who's joining us.